Hey everyone, and welcome to the first YouTube video that I'm going to create for my channel. The first one at least where I'm talking to you as an audience. So I've been asking on the forums, should I start a YouTube channel about this particular reef tank? And a lot of the people said yes. So here we are today, and today's video especially is for Mr. Thomas Burton from Us BRS TV, the channel there, and the actual BRS TV channel as well. And he wants to know a little bit more about the Aquascape, and so that's what we're going to delve into for today's video. But I guess firstly, let's talk about this aquarium first and its quick specs. This is a 4-foot aquarium that's 120 centimeters, and that's by also 45 centimeters, so 1.5 foot, and 45 centimeters deep, so 1.5 foot deep. So really it's around about 200-ish liters of water if you minus all the rocks and stuff. So you can do the conversion into gallons there. I am currently running 2 Ecotech XR30 G5 blues, and I have 1 MP40 there from Ecotech Marine as well, Vortec MP40. As you can see here, a lot of people ask me, where's your overflow? Where's your sump? Where's your filtration? And that's it there. So it runs into the inside into a canister filter inside of this cabinet, and more on that later on. So that's the basic quick specs of this particular aquarium. So when did this aquarium start? It started in January, and that's when all of the fun stuff started to happen. So where we are now, which is July, it's taken us roughly around about 6 to 7 months to get it to where it is. So for today's video, I want to go into aquascaping with you. And a lot of you have realized that this aquarium is called Iwagumi version 2.0. And that's because the first Iwagumi that I made was all the way back in 2015, 2016. And I'll quickly just pop up a photo of that for you here. Boop, that's what you see, and this is now version 2 of that. So what's version 2 like? Well, I guess a lot of you are asking, what's an Iwagumi? An Iwagumi is mainly an aquascape that captures the essence of stone dominance. So there's this idea of a hierarchy of stones that exists within an aquarium. And the stone-dominated landscape, or the stone-dominated aquascape, is what brings about a lot of movement, tension, a lot of shadow, a lot of direction, and we'll go into all of those things in a moment as well. So reef aquascaping, let's talk about it. The first thing we're going to talk about here is how I started off this aquarium and what the main vision of it was. So I started off this aquarium with not live rock, but actually dry rock. And a lot of people these days are using dry rock. They use Marco rock, they use Aquaforest rock, they use real reef rock. And I think those types of rock are great to work with. My advice on that is to just take a hammer to it, use some glue and smash it all, and then put it all together. And that's where I came up with this particular type of shape. And as you can see, the layout here follows a couple of different principles. All right, so what are those principles? Let's talk about that. We have here a sort of rule of thirds thing happening. So if you take a look at the way the screen is split here, a lot of the focal points actually happen around here and here. And then we've got negative space up here, and we've also got a shadow down here. So using the rule of thirds, I've got 4 different aspects of focal point in this aquarium. First focal point, corals. Second focal point, shadows. Third focal point here, negative space. And then we've got corals down here, which are a little bit different. So that's something to keep in mind, is that there's a bit of a compositional balance to this aquarium. Another thing that I want to talk about here is the way I've set up my rocks. So I wanted to create an aquascape that reflected different layers of the reef. So we've got here the upper layer, we've got the middle layer, and then we've got the bottom layer here. And by doing these 3 angled stones in my aquarium, I was able to create a bit of a stratification of corals. So you'll see SPS up at the top, and that creates a little bit of a shadow for the LPS at the bottom. And then you've got these caves at the bottom with a little bit lower light for these lower light demanding corals. So what else did I do in this particular aquascape? I wanted to create a bit of a dynamic tension to this. So you'll notice that this particular main stone here, the big mother stone here, has a little bit of a cantilever effect where the stone almost reaches out of the ground and up into the sky. And what's the point of that? That's to create a little bit of tension where you feel like, oh, is this stone gonna fall over? Is it gonna create a little bit of suspense in this aquarium? That's what I wanted to create. It also has a little bit of direction. So what I'm saying is that a lot of people create aquascapes with perhaps 3 things in their aquascapes, or 3 particular arches, or 3 particular rocks or bommies in the middle. And what you don't really see in aquascapes is an actual sense of movement and direction. So that's another piece of advice that I want people to at least consider when they're making their aquascapes, is consider which way the water, and I mean the water in your mind, is flowing. So if you take a look at this aquarium here, I wanted your eyes to move from left to right. And I guess in the Western world, that's how we read. We read from left to right, and that's how I want people, and myself at least, to read this particular aquarium, is to go from left all the way to the right. The other thing I wanted to create was a little bit of a sense of replication of some sort of recognizable object. So the way that I designed this was to act as if this were some sort of sunken ship that's fallen into a reef. And so we've got almost like a main vessel and its sails that have kind of been overgrown with corals over time. So that's one of the other inspirations that I had, was this idea of a reef that formed over some sort of sunken vessel or ancient sculpture that existed thousands of years before. And I'll go into a little bit more about coral aquascaping in a moment. The next thing I wanted to consider, of course, was the use of negative space. So you'll see in this aquarium there's a lot of negative space around here, and that's pretty normal. Most aquariums have negative space there, but I wanted to at least try negative space in the middle here. And so when you create these lines of negative space, there's some dynamic direction going to it, which means there's no blockiness in this aquarium in terms of the background negative space. Instead, what you have is these really angular deficits of coral here that allow for light to come through, but it also allows for the shape of these particular features to stand out on their own. The next thing that I also considered when creating this aquarium is the use of shadow for aquascaping. Now, if you're a part of the planted aquascaping hobby, you'll notice that shadow in the past couple of years has been a big feature of aquascaping. So in this particular tank, using shadow has been one of the primary goals for both aesthetics but also function. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of our corals have to exist in a very shallow plane of light here. So what we have is, from the space at the top of the aquarium all the way to the bottom, that's around about 40 centimeters. Whereas in nature, some of these corals may exist meters, like 10s, 20 meters, all the way down into the depths. And I'm trying to replicate some sort of stratification that doesn't cook my LPS at the bottom, but also doesn't allow for my SPS to get cooked at the same time. So what have I got here? We've got highlight at the top, casting a bit of a shadow into the caves, as well as a shadow over the LPS. Alrighty, let's take a look at one of the other things I wanted to talk about in this aquascape, and that's the use of the aquascape as a functional object. So A lot of people ask me, hey, Michael, you've only got one MP40, is that enough flow? I'd say for now it is, and as you can tell here, a lot of my corals are getting blasted over here and even up at the back here. You can sort of see here. There's still moving polyps over there. So what's the deal with this sort of aquascape? Well, what I wanted to do was I wanted to create a sense of gyre movement around the aquarium. And that means a lot of the actual aquascape itself is an island. And that means this power head powers my water all the way in a circle around the whole aquascape. And it also goes from here all the way across to this side and then down and then back again. The other thing I wanted to do with this aquascape was the function of this particular rock here. This particular rock here acts as a sail. So if you go back to that idea of a sunken ship, the flow of the water goes across this particular path here, hits these corals and actually flows into the aquascape. So if we look at the way the water moves, it actually goes across, slows down in the middle, does a little bit of a spiral, and then spins all the way back around. And so this particular aquascape also has a functional purpose, which was to allow me to create an aquarium that allows for one wave maker. At the end of the day, if these SPS corals do grow really big, I can always add a second one over here, and that increases the amount of flow throughout this whole aquarium. So I guess what's the summary of all of the top tips for aquascaping here, especially in a reef aquarium? I guess the first thing is consider the way you create an aquascape for direction, the way you create an aquascape for a little bit of tension and dynamic movement, because sometimes even a rock structure can be a feature in and of itself. The next thing I want you to probably consider is the use of shadows and negative space. Shadows and negative space is a really important part of aquascaping that is often forgotten, but I tend to aquascape with as much intention of how much space I don't fill with as much intention as how much space I do fill with corals. The next thing, of course, is focal points using rule of thirds, or you can take a look at the golden ratio, or even just a center focal point if that's something you really want to capitalize on. The one last thing, of course, is using corals as a form of hardscape. I mean, if you think about it, corals are rocks. They form calcium carbonate and they essentially attach themselves to the rocks and become rocks over time. And so in this case here, I've used the corals as a type of hardscape material to create the types of shapes that I want. And you can sort of see the forest fire digi forming clusters here that move in the same direction as the rock, but also kind of reach up to the sky like that. I've also used the hammers here, the Euphelia, to create a little bit of a V path that goes all the way to the back there. And that just creates a little bit of depth. Now that's an illusion. If you've ever seen a picture of a road that goes in a V shape, that's to create a sense of depth. Now remember that this aquarium is only 45 centimeters deep, but in some of the photos it looks much deeper because of this feature here, and that's the hammers in the V shape. So there's, I guess, a lot of things that I want to talk about, but that's the sort of long and short of it. Really basic understanding of aquascaping that I've applied from my freshwater days into the Reef Iwagumi 2.0. So if you've got any more questions, feel free to just leave a comment below. You can always find me as well on Facebook through the Ask BRS TV channels, or I'm usually on the Australian groups, and that's the Marine Aquarium Fanatics. And if you're one of the freshwater aquascaping people, then head on over to Aquascaping Australia and you'll definitely find me there. So ask any questions that you like, but I guess the whole purpose of this channel is to A, educate, B, give you a little bit of an insight into how I set up this aquarium, perhaps maybe inspire you or to give you something to aspire to. And of course, the last thing is just to learn from my mistakes, because I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes in this aquarium, and I guess we'll learn together throughout this whole journey. I hope this video has been a little bit informative for you, a little bit entertaining, and if you got something out of it, then please feel free to subscribe and leave a thumbs up for me, and that way we can continue to make content that adds to the whole aquarium hobby. So it doesn't matter whether or not you have a reef tank or a freshwater tank. I just want to encourage all of you to continue doing what you're doing, which is making an aquascape or an aquarium that looks beautiful to you. So this is my version. Anyway, hope you have a nice day, everyone. I'll see you in the next video, and we'll talk about one of the setups that some people are asking me about, and that's filtration. All right, I'll see you then. Have a good one.